Welcome back to my studio. Today we're going to continue our series on basic sensitometry and talk about calculating film speed. We're still following along with the Kodak Sensitometry Handbook, and so far we've talked about the basics of just a sensitometer. We have talked about gamma, how to calculate that, and how to calculate contrast index. The next step is to calculate film speed. Now, to do so, technically we're talking about average gradient. We've not looked at average gradient. We might in the future, but for the purposes of calculating film speed, we don't actually need to know how to calculate average gradient because we're going to be doing some very specific steps. Average gradient is technically the method we're using, but because film speed uses very specific steps, we can kind of skip ahead on that. And you don't really use average gradient anyway. That's really to calculate the average gradient of any part of the curve. That might be the toe, could be the shoulder, the straight line and the curve, toe and so forth. But it doesn't give you any useful information, but it does give you the method for calculating film speed. What we need to do today is expose a piece of film, develop it, and then plot it just as before. However, there is a very specific angle of that curve to calculate film speed. It's going to take a little bit of trial and error. So let's go ahead and get to the first graph and see if that falls within range. We have our first curve. This is T-Max 100 developed in stock D76 for the published time of 6 minutes and 45 seconds using a rotary method. This was in a Jobo tank at continuous agitation. Now, it is important that if you're going to follow these steps, this follows the ISO standard, so we do need to use stock D76, that's the closest to the developer dictated by ISO documentation for this process. And what we're looking for are some very particular measurements. So we have our base fog, which is here at the 0.18 density. Now remember, this is density and this is exposure. We are looking for the first measurement that is 0.1 above base fog. It's going to be at 0.28. And we get that, 0.28, right. We're going to use this ruler to make sure we're at the right spot. 0.28. We get it right here. So this we're going to label A. Now, we need to look at where that exposure is. And it is here. So 1.0. 1.0 and 0.28. Those are the two metrics we need. 1.0 exposure and at 0.28 density. Now we're going to count over from here 1.3 log density units. That's going to put us at 2.3. Pretty straightforward here in this case. So right here. And I'm going to draw a line up from 2.3 to this point. That's point B. What we are looking for is point B to be at a density of 0.8 above point A. So point A at 0.28 makes it very easy to calculate. We need to be at 1.08 density. So we're going to go ahead and mark 1.08 and draw a line intersecting the line of that 2.3 exposure. And we can see that we are a little bit off. We're below that line. Now, we do have a little bit of margin for error. We can be 0.05 plus or minus. So if that's supposed to be 1.08, and I'll write that over here, 1.08, it means we can actually be as high as 1.13 or as low as 1.03. Where we actually intersect is at 1.0. We're out of spec. We're too low, which means we need to develop longer in order to make this work. So we're going to go back, we're going to expose a new strip of the film and develop it a little bit longer. The original time, 6 minutes and 15 seconds. We're going to develop for 7 full minutes. I feel like we're far enough below this. 7 minutes and additional 45 seconds should get us pretty darn close. So let's go ahead and do that, come back and graph that. Okay, we're back. I'm going to go ahead and label this right now at 7 minutes so that I know we are working with the correct one. When we compare, we don't get them mixed up. All right, so let's go ahead and graph this one and see how we compare. Okay, we've got our curve again. We have a base fog of 0.19, a little bit longer development time, a little bit higher base fog. So we need to find 0.1 above that. That's going to be a 0.29, and that's going to be right through here. So this is point A. That's going to be right here. We have a density of 0.679. So 0.79 density at 0.29 density at 0.79 exposure. So again, we're going to look for 1.3 density units from here. So that's going to be 2.09. So 2.09 is right here. So let's measure up from that point. Here we are. And we want to be at 0.8 above our density. So that's going to be 1.09. 1.09. Here. So this is point B. We want to be right here, just above. Again, we have a margin for error, so if it's supposed to be 1.09, write that down. We can be 1.14 down to 1.04. We are actually at 1.06. So technically, we're there. We're right at the minimum, 1.05 if we want to cut it kind of close. So 1.05. I actually think we can get a little bit closer. So we are going to do one more at 7 minutes and 15 seconds because I really want to get not just within that window. I want to get as close to correct as we can get. So we're going to do one more at 7 minutes and 15 seconds. All right. We have base fog at 0.19, so we're looking for 0.29 above base fog. That's going to put us right here. We have A. That's putting us 0.29 right here, actually. That's going to put us at 0.9. Let's get that a little cleaner. Yeah. So 0.9 or 0.9. So we're looking for 8.9 above, or 0.89 above. Which will put us right here. Nope. Scratch that. We're looking for 0.29, 0.8 above this mark. Ignore this. I'm not graphing that again. But we are looking for 1.3 over. That's going to be 2.4. No, 2.2. So 2.2. We're looking for this mark. And we're looking for 0.8 above the 0.9 area. That's going to be 1.09, which is going to put us right here, which puts us right there. B, that is 1.09 density at 2.2 log exposure. And that's exactly where our graph intersects. Great! We are now ready to move on. So, a little bit of trial and error. We had to make sure we had the correct development time. It took 3 tries, but we got there. It is not the published 6 minutes and 15 seconds. It is 7 minutes and 15 seconds for me. Could be different for you. Depends on how you agitate. All right. Now, since we have this, we're ready to move to the next step, and that is actually calculating film speed. This point is at 0.9. We need the antilog of 0.9. And you can go and look for online calculators. Let's use my phone science calculator right here. So we can do 10 antilog 0.9 equals 7.9. It's going to be close enough. We're going to round up to 8. So we have an antilog equals 8. What we need to do, very simply, is divide 800 millilux by the antilog of the density that gets us at 0.1 above base fog when we develop to be in this window. So since we have developed long enough, all we need now is just that density. For us, base fog is 0.19. That means 0.1 above that is 0.29. We have that density at an exposure of 0.9 log units. The antilog of that is 8. 800 divided by 8 is 100. 100 speed film, and I'm using T-Max 100. So that is it. That is how we calculate that. Now, it does mean that you need to have a properly calibrated sensitometer. If you don't, those can be off. You can get an exposure too far to the left or too far to the right and calculate an incorrect amount. So it is important to have your sensitometer calibrated correctly. It should be outputting before you put your step wedge on 3.35 log units of exposure. And that can be whatever the millilux equivalent is of that. I'm not going to calculate that for the purpose of this video. But once you have a sensitometer that is calibrated to output 3.35 log units of exposure, you put your step wedge on top of that. When you expose your film, you should have a density of 0.9 at the 0.1 density above base fog for any 100 speed film. I would recommend trying out one of the top tier film brands like Kodak or Harman, Ilford, on like T-Max 100, Delta 100, something like that, in order to check and see if your sensitometer is correct. I wouldn't go for what I consider a second tier film like FOMA, because who knows what you're going to really get. So if you are testing with a 400 speed film, you would get, without any filtration, the same log exposure. You would get your 0.1 density above base fog at the 0.3 mark on the graph. That would be here. So at this point, you would get your 0.1 above base fog. For a 50 speed film, then you would get one stop to the right. So if it's 0.9, you would get it at one stop over, which is 1.2. So at this point would be a 50 ISO. This point is a 400 ISO. 0.9 is a 100 ISO. Now, of course, you can shift that over left and right with filtration. So if you calculate this with a top tier film of known ISO, I would trust Kodak or Ilford to actually be the speed that's rated when you follow these directions. Then if your exposure is anything but 0.9 for one of those 100 speed films, then you can filter your sensitometer accordingly to get the exposure left and right until it's correct. And from there, anything you test should be pretty accurate. And that's really all you need to do. And that's how I calibrated mine. I knew I should get 0.9. I didn't. So I filtered until I did. And you can then do the math and calculate what that would be. And again, it should be 3.35 log units of exposure without the step wedge. So that is the basis for ISO film speed calculation. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me on the comment section or on my Discord, and I will help you try to figure some of that out if you're having issues. And again, you can factor average gradient if you like. I know we didn't talk about how to actually calculate average gradient. The reason being, we know specifically what gradient we need, and that should be at the 1.3 log units exposure over from your 0.1 density exposure. And then it should be 0.8 density units above that same point. So as long as you've figured those things out, then you should be able to calculate this and get your film speed. So I do recommend you get the sensitometer calibrated. Either send it in and have it done, it's probably going to be expensive, or use a known film, get it reasonably calibrated on your own, and then from there you should be able to calculate any film using this ISO method to figure out its actual film speed. That may not be, however, the speed setting you need to use in your camera, because you're exposing the film here with the sensitometer. In the camera, you're trusting your shutter, and your shutter may be a little bit fast, a little bit slow, and you're going to get an exposure index, which could be slightly different than the film speed. That's a different topic. That's for a zone system video series. We'll try to do one at some point in the future. But hopefully that helps, and we will continue the sensitometry series in the future at some point and look at a family of curves. Alright, so thank you very much for watching. If you would like to help support this channel, you can go to the membership tab for a sustaining membership. You can go to the super thanks down here and give just a one-time donation to get this channel running and more film and so forth for these sort of things. Or you can get merchandise down in the links below. It is appreciated and it does help. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.